starts to linger, it's home I know. If you catch me daydreaming, now and forever, thoughts are carrying me along to that place we call home. Down that long road, throughout life we roam. Whenever I go to that place I know, it'll always be home, home to me.
This place, to me, is special, and I'd like to tell you about it. It is a story that is complex, and yet it is simple, full of contrasts, a gentleness of people in a rugged frontier setting. This place is an island in the north end of Lake Huron. There are several communities here which, though they share common ground, being in it together, so to speak, have through much of history remained separate entities, islands unto themselves. On top of that, native and non-native cultures have intertwined here. Until today, it is a model of sharing, getting along. It's a wonderful story, one that will take us 2 episodes of sketches to tell. But it's one I think you will enjoy. The story of time and of an island that many people simply refer to as the Manitoulin.
Odawa, Nishnabek, Daume. Ojibwe, Jinkade, Mandeshgigidon. Mamoistrigade, Mandeshgigidon, where Odawa, Ojibwe, Minodish, Odoa Adami. Manda, Minis, Endam, Manitoulin, Eshnikadek. Ninwe, Gijik Hendana, Shinkadek, Nidominis, Ninwa, Odawaminis. Apjagun Zaktuna, Manda Minis, Endam.
Manitoulin, tied to the northern Algoma district and La Cloche Hills by this landmark swing bridge. The sole year-round road link to the mainland spans the North Channel. Scattered throughout the largest island in freshwater in the world, Gore Bay, Kagawang, Little Current, Shegawande are among the separate places that contain half of the island's people. At South Bay mouth, the ferry Cheechemon seasonally ties Manitoulin to southern Ontario. Manitoulin, the hereditary home of Gitche Manitou, the Great Spirit, is alive with a resurgence of native culture. Its 5 reserves make up the balance of the island's 10,000 population. Al Shawana lives at Wickwemikong.
This is the ancestral home of the people here. The land has never been ceded to any government. So I guess the pride is there as the home of the Odawa people, and the pride in maintaining this particular unceded status.
This deep-rooted pride is the driving force that keeps custom alive. The annual powwow celebration is a festival of color. The drum, the symbolic heartbeat that rings true to elder and youth alike. Preserving heritage reaches beyond the stage. It permeates day-to-day life. For Stanley Peltier, tradition is important.
The main pole on the teepee is the one that pulls the cover up, and it's called the chief. The poles themselves, they each have a name. and it basically has to do with the basic values, such as the first pole represents obedience, and the second pole represents respect and humility, and a few of the others, such as the main pole on there represents strength, that lifts up your cover and so on. There's other things like love and happiness and thankfulness that are represented throughout all the poles that go inside the teepee that hold up the teepee itself. I live in Wikwemikong here on the reserve, and I'm a school teacher by profession. As a young man, I thought that maybe to work with my people was one of the things I wanted to do, and as a result, I went off to the reserve and I went to school for a number of years, and I've obtained a couple of university degrees, and I've come back to the reserve to work on some of the things that I thought would be meaningful to my people, and also teach the Indian language, or our language, to our people, and so on, and some of the ways of our culture that our young people may not be practicing right now. Maybe just to sort of keep the tradition alive. So on. Those are some of the things that I would like to teach.
At the time artist Paul Kane passed through here, rendering these images in 1845, the impact of native interaction with fur traders and missionaries was apparent. The tribes of the upper Great Lakes had venerated the spirit of the Manitoulin for generations. Now they were seeing a way of life passing, a way of life that recent findings reveal could go back over 10,000 years. A circle turning.
Oh, let all who thirst, let them come to the water.
Adapting to change, the Jesuit order has maintained unbroken ties with the Anishinaabe, the Ojibwe nation of people. Through re-examination of cultural interpretation, native and non-native beliefs are fusing, forging a model of spiritual understanding, a new humanity.
Why should you pay the price?
David Nazer, at Wikwemikong's Holy Cross Mission, plays a role in this blend of two worlds, a role his predecessors began over a century and a half ago.
The Jesuits had come, and we were working with native people in the bush, and but already you could see that the situation was complicated. There was no longer enough game to sustain life in the bush. The trade with the fur traders was really deleterious for native people, because one of the main stocks in trade for the white fur traders was alcohol, which was a horror for the communities that lived traveling through the bush, because they were dependent for so many resources on the traders. So even the Jesuits in the early documents of the 1840s write with laments in their diaries that it's unfortunate that that a way of life will have to be modified drastically, because simply because the semi-nomadic life in the bush was too open to the corrupting of the people and of the culture and all that. So it was kind of seen as a necessary evil to encourage the settlement of the people.
In the nearby village of Manitoulin stands a landmark to a period of social upheaval. With the signing of a treaty in 1836, Lieutenant Governor Sir Francis Bond Head had hoped to initiate a migration of Indians of Upper Canada to Manitoulin, where they could live free from the influence of white civilization. Tied to this was the Manitoulin Experiment, as it became known, a well-intentioned but unworkable attempt to modify native society. David Smith talks of the ill-fated project that fell to Indian Affairs Superintendent Anderson to carry out.
And he had wanted to try to set up something where he could help educate these people and improve their way of life. So when he heard of the land on Manitoulin Island, he decided this was quite likely the place to go.
Under Anderson's leadership, the Reverend Charles Crosby Bruff would lay the groundwork for an Anglican church mission. The plan struggled from the beginning. Not readily embraced by the Anishinaabe, a discouraged Bruff left.
A new priest came, who was an Irishman, Reverend O'Meara, and he decided very strongly that the church should be built. And it was through his efforts that the church was begun in 1845. He made a couple of trips, at least one trip to Ireland to raise money for the church. He could not get money locally or from the government of Upper Canada, so he managed, with the encouragement of the native people living here, to find enough money to build the church. And the church was consecrated in 1849.
St. Paul's remains as the oldest Anglican parish in Northern Ontario. The trying period saw white thinking dominating native beliefs at every step, reducing them to pawns in a religious chess game.
The government plans for settlement were not attractive to the native people. They had set up the town of Manitoulin as a native reserve, but there was always some kind of feeling of, I don't know, lack of trust or suspicion or confusion, maybe is the best word. And the native people never settled in the government town. But they settled here in Wikwimikong, and we arrived at the time that the settlement was beginning. And perhaps we aided in some way, sort of a focal point for a community. What's remarkable about the church and about the ruins that one sees beside the church is that it's about 99% native labor, and even the foremans on the project were native.
In 1848, a school made Holy Cross central to Great Lakes Catholic missions from Thunder Bay to Owen Sound. At Manitoulin, Bond Head's dream was fading.
And sad to say, the two church groups, particularly at that time, could not work together. New Year's apparently was a custom with the people here at that time that they would bake cakes and they would share them with the people, and especially among the native peoples living here. And apparently one New Year's, the cakes that were baked by the Anglicans at the Manitoulin mission were much larger than the cakes built by the people at the Wiki mission. And it was felt for a few hours on that day that there was going to be quite an exodus from Wiki to Manitoulin in order that the people there could share in these bigger cakes. They just didn't feel that the cake and Wiki were big enough that year. However, by that time, the government again had decided that the reserve system on Manitoulin Island was not going to work. The Indian people did not want to move here, and all the thousands of people that they had hoped would come here and settle just didn't pan out. There were a number of people in southern Ontario who were also looking for new land to settle, and the Manitoulin Island looked like the perfect place.
By the 1860s, the island of 100 lakes looked inviting. The best homesteads taken up in the southern part of the province, and the failure of the Manitoulin experiment prompted the Upper Canada government with a new treaty to open the door to non-native settlement. Sandy McGilvery.
Some came to do some lumbering. They were ostensibly farmers, but they were allowed to harvest a certain amount of their forest. And so they did that, and sometimes they'd be buying farms and doing some lumbering and move on to another farm. And maybe their main reason was to act as small-time lumbering entrepreneurs.
Enterprise became centered on the island's resources. At times, reduced to eating the berries of the hawthorn tree for survival, the newcomers were known as haw-eaters. They turned their hand to anything that could keep them going. Soon towns began to spring up, most along the vast shoreline. Remote from each other, they became islands within the island. The steamboat a common denominator, for it meant contact with the outside world and with each other. Of the businesses that became legendary in island society, McDermott Brothers of Providence Bay, Turners of Little Current, Farquhars of Mindamoya. Maston's General Store in Manitoulin recently closed, ending an era in Manitoulin history, a chapter written over a period of a century. Catherine Maston.
Our great ambition, and we reached it, was to take in $200 in cash on a Saturday. So it wasn't a very big business. It was mostly trade.
The most valued of Manitoulin resources, fish from surrounding Lake Huron. George Purvis's family has hauled nets for generations.
Well, the Purvis family have been on the west end of Manitoulin Island since the early 1880s. The native people and ourselves, we all fished this area, and we had the large steam tugs who would pull the native sailboats out in the morning onto the open lake, and then during the day they would troll for the lake trout and come back with perhaps 100 or 200 pounds in the evening, sell them here at the packing shed, and we would pack them and ship them to New York, Chicago, wherever that the market was. And these traditional markets still exist for other types of species of fish that weren't available in the 40s but are now.
Life on the water gets in the blood. In his 70s, William Trudeau lives for his regular run to the fishing grounds.
We used to go out and catch quite a few fish. We used a line, you know, and we went out way out in deep water. I might say maybe about 40 years ago, or even maybe about 50. So we used to catch a lot of fish. There was a lot of lake trout at the time.
Fishing is something that is very precious to the native person. People had their areas for fishing and what they deemed to be theirs, certainly the surrounding waters. So the people have been very protective about their fishing rights. And in 1863, there was a disturbance right here in Wikwemicong. The headmen and the chiefs at the time went out because they were told that they would have to buy fishing areas. And in fact, they asked people to leave from some of the islands in the vicinity. And the government group then, with 22 constables, came in here, and there was a confrontation.
The event signaled a need for negotiations more sensitive to native peoples. Unofficially, this heightened the role of the Jesuit fathers.
We were often the people that were in the middle. We were interpreters between the government and the native people, since we always spoke the language in those years. We lobbied quite a bit with the native people for the retention of the land, keeping it out of a treaty situation, to the point that one of our fellows was charged with murdering a government minister who died in the bay one day. And but that itself, it's a long and very interesting story, but it's an example of the heat of the times and the complexity of the times and the government's intentions and its desire for white settlement, the loss of native identity, the struggle for retention of something. And here were these French Jesuits kind of caught in the middle, neither British nor native, but concerned and a part of the picture, whether they wanted to be or not.
From this contrast of cultures against a backdrop of industry came an unlikely crossover of perspectives in recent decades. Interpreting Manitoulin life in art form earned recognition for one individual in his portrayal of the native experience in a non-native world. Edna Trudeau.
He couldn't read, he couldn't write, he couldn't even speak English. I don't know how white people understood his language. I couldn't even understand him. But he wrote letters. You should see the letters that he wrote. He drew little pictures to show my mother what time he was getting home, what time he was leaving his camp. and he would draw a suitcase, a little man walking with a suitcase in his hand and getting on a boat or on a plane, eh? Anyway, my mother knew when Angus would be home.
Angus Trudeau was above all a very fine man. Angus served as a cook on freighters going to and fro on the lakes. And since he couldn't read or write, he had to draw pictures of the ingredients in his recipes.
Island life through the eyes of the artist. More so in Angus Trudeau's time than now, island life was never more defined than at the final run at Summer's End.
The last boat of the season was a very poignant time when, in one reference, the Manitoulin Expositor, which was located at Manitoulin at the time, the editor writes about how I believe it was the Pacific was the first in and the last out, and he said the dear old Pacific, passing down the channel, and it was, you could almost see the tears in his eyes in the description of that last boat of the season, because that was, in those days, that was their last link.
The steamboats would whistle as they came around a point so that we had a little warning. And we missed that. We missed the whistle a lot, too.
In part 2 of this Sketches of Our Town feature program, we'll look at the steamboat era and Saturday night on Manitoulin Island.
Oh, let all who thirst, let them come to the water, and let all who have nothing, let them come to the Lord without money, without price. Why should you pay the price except for the Lord? And let all who see, let them